Hi, welcome back to a brand new episode on the Solutions podcast. Today is Monday, and for the month of February, we are looking at mindset. Because it's the month of love, we ought to love ourselves by working on our minds first. In this episode, I'm going to share with you how to overcome any obstacle that is thrown at you. Without further ado, let's get right into this episode. So I'm reading the book, The Obstacle is the Way. And ever since I started reading it, I haven't put it down a single minute. In fact, just before I recorded this episode, I am reading it like I read it in my morning routine. It's morning, Monday, the 12th of February, 2024. And this is the time I'm recording this episode because I had some obstacles I had to overcome. I had lost the sponge to my microphone, so I kept on looking for it. When you have babies, you can understand. Sometimes your things are moved from where they are to other places. But luckily I found it, and I'm going to record this episode for you and share with you how to overcome any obstacle that is thrown at you. Let me start with my story. I think I've shared this over and over again on this podcast, but last year, 2023, I was on maternity leave, meaning I was home looking after my newborn baby, my daughter. My plan was to be on maternity leave for at least 6 months before I could go back to my job. I work for a small biotech company. It's small, like we are close-knit. It's around 20 employees in different states and also where I work. I chose to work for that company basically because its mission and vision aligns with my values, my skills, my ambition, and my cause. We make antiviral drugs that treat various antiviral diseases. And that's one of my core belief and value, to create therapeutics, drugs that help in treatment of different diseases. So our company basically relies on government funding and some private investments. And the time I was supposed to return to work after maternity leave, we were going through a mini recession. That meant as much as my bosses wanted to keep me, they did not have the financial capacity to have me on. And they had to wait for funding before it could come through, before I could get back to work. As a person who loves to plan, this threw me off in such a sense that I was not sure when I was going to go back to work. I had a safety net of my savings that I could use in that time, but I didn't want to deplete them before I could get back to work. And that meant I was in limbo. I had to touch on my savings during that period because I wasn't earning. Maternity leave in Australia is not paid full salary. You earn from the government. They give you the bare minimum, which was actually a total shock to me. I didn't know that was the case. January 2023 came. I wasn't sure of when I was going to go back to work. I didn't know whether I needed to look for another job. I was not sure whether I should contact my bosses. And every time I would contact my boss, he would tell me, yeah, we're still waiting for funding. I'll be in touch. And I also didn't want to seem very desperate. I also tried to apply for some jobs, but there were no jobs basically because I'm more of a specialist and our jobs are usually fewer compared to other jobs. And sometimes when I applied for jobs, they could not even call you back for interviews. And there was also a recession that was going on after the pandemic. So all those things put me in a hard place. That was my obstacle. My obstacle was I was now eating on my savings that I planned to use for something else. I wasn't sure whether I could have a job immediately. I wasn't sure when I could get back to work. So one of the days I sat down and contemplated my life. I was thinking, what can I do? I decided to use the time to do something about my life. As much as I love science, I love the work I do, I love my research, I decided to concentrate on other hobbies that I'd always put off. So I used my obstacle to be the way. And this started by my perception. Instead of mourning and feeling sorry about it and complaining about the situation, I decided to turn into my creativity. I resumed season 3 of the podcast in July. I decided to spend more time with my child. I looked at my situation and I knew it was giving me a chance to spend more time with my child, to nurture her, to watch her grow. I decided to concentrate on my coaching business and looking at how I could elevate it to the level that it's on right now. I decided to work on things that I put off in the back burner, say starting a YouTube channel, Faith Liz's Corner, and producing videos every single week, learning how to record videos, getting into studying my project management. I decided to do a lot of things during that time because I was not having a job. One of my fears had been, what if we ran out of our savings? But my husband works. So I looked at it with a better perspective, saying, my husband goes to work. He can afford to pay for the rest of the things. However much it would have been great for both of us to be having a source of income, we could still live on one source of income and live happy. So I decided not to stress myself about that condition. And that started by changing my perspective of the obstacle that I was facing. So when it comes to overcoming any obstacle in your life, you're going to look at your perception. How do you perceive that obstacle? In what ways can you use that obstacle to be the way? I love how Ryan Holiday puts it. He says that the obstacle in the way becomes the way. Let me say it again. The obstacle in the way becomes the way. Many of us have so many obstacles that we are facing. I've shared many on this podcast. If you go back and listen to the previous episode, we also talked about mindset. Success mindset are going to move you ahead. I've also shared with you, while I was advancing my career, I had this boss who never really supported my career advancement. He never provided references to the schools that I was applying for to do my master's. But I used that obstacle to create a way for myself. I got myself a mentor. That mentor was the one who helped me end up getting the scholarship I got. So today I'm challenging you to do an audit of your life. Look at those obstacles that you've always considered to be obstacles, and how can you turn them into the way? How can you utilize that obstacle that you have to be the way propelling you to where you're supposed to go? The second obstacle I faced was my speech. I think I've been so vulnerable on this podcast, and I've shared with you how my speech impediment literally stopped me from starting this podcast, literally stopped me from starting my YouTube channel. It stopped me from doing a lot of things because I became so aware of it. And every time I would communicate, I would think people are not going to understand what I'm saying. But instead of letting that obstacle stop me from starting this podcast and starting the 2 YouTube channels that I have, I used it to my betterment. I decided to invest time to overcome it, to learn how to communicate better, to learn how to think fast and talk smarter, to learn how to communicate, to get rid of filler words, to take time as I speak, to slow down my speech. All those have been things that have helped me overcome that speech impediment. And also practice. Every time I record an episode, every time I record a video, every time I record a YouTube video, every time I show up on my podcast or my Instagram or anywhere else I'm communicating, I'm practicing my speech. And today, I can tell you, I might still have the speech impediment, but I don't let it define me. I've learned how to overcome that problem by deliberate practice, by acknowledging that it's there and devising tools and ways to overcome it. Number 2, when it comes to overcoming your obstacle, is to realize what you have in control. Ask yourself, what control do I have over this situation? What control do you have over this situation? I'll still use the same example. I didn't have a job. I was home. I was supposed to have returned to work in January. I didn't go back to work until July. What was in my control in that time? I could not determine when I could go back to work because I'm not my own employer. But what was in control is how I would perceive that situation. What was in control was how I could use that condition to do something better. What was in control was my attitude towards that problem, my mindset towards that problem. In the book, The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Holiday talks about some gentleman who was wrongfully murder he didn't commit. That story moved me so much. When the guy gets into the prison, he tells the wardens and everyone else, I'm here. I don't blame you because it's not you who put me in here. But there's no single day of my stay here that you're going to treat me as a prisoner. I might be here wrongfully, but I'm not a prisoner to this situation. That's the type of mindset you need to adopt. You might be in a situation that is very unfair for you. You might be suffering something that you didn't really have any say in it. You might have applied for a job, but you got a rejection, yet you knew you had everything needed to get the job. Your circumstance does not define who you are. Where you are right now does not define who you are as a person. It doesn't define your identity. It does not define how intelligent you are. It doesn't define anything. Circumstances are circumstances. So if you looked at every obstacle you have in your life with this perception, you will find yourself having that objectivity mindset where you look at it for what it is and not beat yourself down, not complain, but rather find ways to get yourself out of that situation. I love the serenity prayer that says, God, grant me the serenity of mind to accept things that I cannot change, the courage to change things that I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. If we approached every obstacle we are facing with this mindset, we would be very far. Understanding the difference between the things you have control over and the things you do not have control over. When you're faced with any big challenge, your mindset matters. The first thing is to be very objective about the challenge. I've explained how to be objective, look at it with eyes that can solve it. I shared more about this in the previous episode, how I do my journaling. I love to use a third-person narrative where I ask myself objective questions and find objective answers. Instead of saying, I don't have a job, I'll ask myself, Faith, you don't have a job. What could you do in this situation? That way, I'm not putting the blame on myself, but I'm using my brain to think of any possible solutions to the problem I'm facing. And this problem right now is me not having a job. Number 2, you can decide to control your emotions. Our emotions can either upgrade us or downgrade us. Learn to keep cool-headed when faced with problems. I recall last year when my sister calls me and tells me I've lost my dad. She actually called me and told me, hi, how are you? I had just spoken to her a few minutes ago. And her answer was, how are you? I'm like, I spoke to you. Then she's like, what are you doing? I tell her, I'm just here standing. She's like, can you have a seat? As soon as she told me, can you have a seat? I knew something had gone bad. As soon as she told me that news, I felt numbness in my feet, my hands, and my brain just came to a frozen state. I could not think. I could not cry. I could not express an emotion. I was just in total shock and disbelief. But in that instance, I had to control my emotions. I had to control how I was feeling. That was one of the most challenging periods of my life, that I had to control that obstacle of my emotion. First, I was over 10,000 miles away from my mom. My other siblings were also in other countries. I could not be there at that instance when my dad lost his life. The only thing I could do was to control my emotions. I recall having to go to work the next day because I had some work I had not finished. I could not just abandon my work because I've lost my dad. I had to wind up everything at work, and I could not do anything. I realized there wasn't anything I could do if I decided to cry, scream, yell. I was far away. I controlled my emotions in that state. And even when I got onto the plane to leave Australia to go back to Uganda, I had to control my emotions because I had my 2 children with me. I had to be calm. I had to look at the situation objectively and say, I'm going back home. It's not the best experience that I would have wanted, but at least I've made it. Number 3 is to choose to see the good in every situation. I shared this in my review of 2023. Even during that insurmountable obstacle and pain that I was experiencing because of my dad's passing, I recognized some things that were good in my life at that moment. I had made it to Uganda. Last minute flight that cost me almost 10,000. I was there in flesh and blood to bury my dad. I was there with my children and the rest of my siblings and my mom. My kids got to meet the extended family in a big family reunion. All those were things